Even though this is a pretty crazy shot with a long lens and a lot of vibration and energy in the shot, I wanted to make sure that several frames were like crystal clear, so subconsciously you actually absorb it, even if it's for just one frame out of like 40 frames. So a frame like this, I would pause on and I'm like, there's something missing here. I think we need to see Ray. So if you happen to look, there's a little photograph of Ray back there. Every single movie now has hundreds of visual effects. And I'm not even talking about the space movies or the superhero movies. Pretty much every Best Picture nominee, even if it's a small art house film, has been touched in some way or another with invisible visual effects. You could spend 2 weeks on something and the audience will never notice it. The bad part is that nobody will ever notice your work. I'm Todd Vaziri, digital effects artist. Let's watch a clip from the exciting ending of Rogue One. So from this clip, it's clear that there are a few obvious visual effects aspects to the sequence. The biggest one of which is a 1977 era Carrie Fisher as Princess Leia in the shot that was filmed in 2016. But there's definitely some effects here that people may not have realized are actually digital visual effects. So this is the raw photography that was shot by director Gareth Edwards and visual effects supervisor John Knoll. This first part of the sequence, they did build out the blockade runner to exacting detail. You'll see back here, there's a blue screen where we're gonna do a digital set extension. When the camera turns around and you see the cockpit of the blockade runner, this cockpit doesn't really exist. So this was actually a partial set that had no electronics. And you might be thinking, why wouldn't you just build a set? At a certain level, there's always a challenge with these types of movies. Are you gonna build a physical set? Are you gonna build a virtual set? Or some kind of hybrid in between? For this sequence, the sequence was extremely planned and designed so that the cockpit of the blockade runner would be seen in only 2 shots from pretty much the exact same angle. And also there would be extremely limited actor interaction with the set. Physically building a giant, beautiful Star Wars worthy set with all the electronics, all the buttons, all the levers, all the graphics, that would be an incredibly time-consuming and expensive proposition. Whereas if we only built the areas that the actors would actually be touching, it would be a lot more bang for your buck. This is a very straightforward, plain foam core set that was then built in computer graphics by an artist named Delcio Gomez. And hopefully, when it's all composited together, nobody would even be thinking about it. But this can only happen with good design, a solid plan, and then sticking to that plan. The red dots, you'll see this a lot in behind the scenes footage of visual effect shots where we know we're gonna have to match move the sequence. We need reference markers. You'll also see things like this in behind the scenes footage. You'll see a chip chart, you'll see a chrome sphere and a gray sphere. It actually gives us a ton of information. The gray sphere gives us lighting and shading information that we can then use when we have to create computer graphics in the set. The chrome sphere is trying to get a reflection of everything that is around this ball in this moment in space. That is very valuable for many reasons. Oh, that's where that key light is. Oh, that's the color temperature of the ceiling. Oh, that's what the ground looked like. So when we add our computer graphics, we can light it much more realistically as opposed to just guessing. So you might be noticing there's these 2 GoPros on tripods back there that are filming the 2 pilots. John Knoll put those there just in case we wanted to get an image of those actors reflected in the view screen that we don't see right here. At the beginning of the shot, you can see the actors' real reflections back there. You also see a reflection of Princess Leia in the shot because she's just off to the right. It's one of those subtle little things that really help sell the shot. So again, this is a work in progress shot where we dissolve from the real star field into Ryan Hopkins effect stars. I want to mention star fields for just a second. Star fields are kind of important in the world of Star Wars, in the movies that we make. At Industrial Light and Magic, we had been using the same computer graphics tool to make star fields for many, many years. And it was getting a little bit long in the tooth. And I took it upon myself. I'm like, I really want to create a new tool to create star fields. I used this sequence as my test bed to see how can I create a computer graphics tool to make star fields that can be future-proofed for the next decade or whatever. And it worked out. So I make the stars in Star Wars. So here's a clip from Dungeons & Dragons Honor Among Thieves. The shot that I'm going to talk to you about is the tail end of the owlbear sequence.
What is that again? Owlbear.
The obvious visual effects here are the fact that we have her transforming from the owlbear into a human, but I want to talk about this very end of the shot. This is what was photographed on the day. Not a lot of shocking things here, but what you've noticed is that when the camera finishes its orbit around Sophia, there's a breath and then she fires. And that was all planned on the day. In editorial, when they were cutting the sequence together, it felt like she was aiming for too long. So the directors asked us, could we move that event, like 20, 30, 40 frames earlier in the shot so that it's happening while the camera is still orbiting around her. Should make for a better energy in the sequence. And of course, I foolishly said, yeah, sure, we can do that. Turns out it was actually pretty difficult. So what I've done is I've taken later frames of her and moved it earlier in my timeline and started just doing basic isolations to try to separate the various elements of her body so that it would actually work. One way of trying to illustrate this is this picture-in-picture. She's actually firing much later. As you can see on the left here, the camera is pretty stationary and that's raw footage. On the right is my first proof of concept, like, could I actually do this? And if you step through frame by frame, it's pretty sloppy and pretty quick, but I needed buy-off from editorial to say, hey, this is good timing. Now go ahead and clean it all up. So then Trevor Hazel, who was Roto paint supervisor of this show, and we got together and we decided, how are we gonna do this? Which required basically rebuilding the trees behind her for that earlier section and isolating her for that later section, and me doing a bunch of cutting and pasting and morphing and reanimating her hair, her hand, her arm to make sure it all blends together to get rid of that chunk of time so that it all just flows and nobody even thinks about it. So like even here in the early version, you see she's got extra limbs. Her hair has trapped older versions of the trees. Those are future trees back there. Obviously, we have a lot of work to do. So for a shot like this, it took a lot of back and forth to make sure that it all worked out. And it was probably over the course of maybe 2 weeks, off and on. We're always working on several shots at once. For example, I decided to keep this part of her armor from the earlier section, but I needed the bungee cord from the later section. That's an entire composite here where I'm taking past and future and shoving them together, and hopefully nobody can tell. And just to add a little bit of extra energy to what she was doing, I added a little dust poof. It's something that you don't even think about. It just makes it feel that much more authentic. These types of invisible visual effects are accessible to almost every movie now. And pretty much every movie has these types of effects that nobody necessarily planned on, but for continuity, for a little bit of additional set decoration, for a little bit of additional design and visual interest, we can do this now at an efficient way. As much as space battles and superhero antics are exciting, sometimes the invisible stuff is so rewarding. So now let's watch this clip from Disney Plus series, Skeleton Crew. Here we have a pretty, typical Star Wars scene where we have two characters climbing up a giant cliff in an amazing landscape. Pretty clear, obvious visual effects here. Hopefully you're buying into the world. A beautiful environment that was built using digital techniques and some new real-time tools. We sometimes use the term matte painting. Basically, it means a synthetic environment that has been painted in one way or another. It could be with digital tools. It could be actual brushstrokes by amazing painters that would then be optically composited later into live action. In a case like this, it's a combination of photography, paintings, and we also built this sequence environment in our real-time system. Almost like a game engine where you get your results of your changes instantaneously. With traditional computer graphics, we cannot see the results instantly. We can't move a light and immediately get that feedback. It could take a couple of seconds. Extremely detailed renders, it could take 20, 30 hours a frame. But a real-time system allows you to be able to see everything in real time. What was really fun about this shot is that it exemplifies all of the high-tech fancy things that we can do now, combined with the most low-tech problem-solving tools that we have at our disposal. What was filmed on that day was an extremely partial set with the stunt performers climbing, and they were actually filmed separately. The whole point of this is that the two kids in the previous scene tie a rope around each other as they're doing this extremely dangerous thing so they could feel a little bit safer. So what's the job here? The job is to take them out of this partial set and put them in the computer graphics world and hopefully make it look extremely photoreal and plausible. Here's one of our earliest takes of like just setting up the geography and early extraction of the blue screen. So the two of them are right on top of each other, and that's not gonna really work. You can see we've got a lot of work to do before this actually feels real. So we need to separate them, start really working on the shot. Another work in progress, we're getting there. Now they're properly distanced apart. We're all getting pretty happy. The sequence is coming to a close. We've got some blowing mist, we've got lens flare, I've got a little bit of camera rumble on the shot. We're very close to final. Until compositing supervisor Heath Kranek mentioned in dailies, hey, where's the rope between the two actors? Everybody in the room was like, oh, geez, we forgot to put in the rope. Yeah, that's my bad. We never discussed how we were gonna accomplish the rope. It was only going to be for this one shot, because in every other shot, it's a practical rope of the two actors on a blue screen set. We all kind of got dejected and go, okay, well, I guess we need to model a rope, we gotta texture it, we're gonna have to light it, we're gonna have to simulate it in computer graphics. I guess we're not gonna get this shot done anytime soon. And I said, wait, hold on a second. Let me try something. And I didn't tell him what I was gonna try because if it failed, I wanted to, save face. So later that day, I thought, what if I actually filmed a little element and stuck it into the shot? We're never gonna have a close-up of it, and it might just work. It looks small enough, it's only side lit. So I fumbled around in my garage, and I was looking for a rope that could possibly simulate the rope in the scene. Well, I couldn't get an exact match, but I found some bungee cord. And I'm like, okay, I gotta puppeteer this some way. Let me fasten it to the top of my garage door with some blue tape, looking really janky there. How am I gonna film it? Well, I have my iPhone 12 at the time that can record at high speed, because I knew that this was gonna look a little bit too rigid and too small, and filming it at a high speed and moving it around would make it feel a little bit bigger and give me more flexibility if I need to retime it or reanimate it. So I set this up. I made sure the lighting direction was similar to what's in the shot. That's just a microphone stand to be my tripod, and I had all these little bits of gear around to attach my iPhone to the microphone stand. I stopped down so that the door went really dark, and I just started filming. And I went down underneath it and just kind of started jiggling the bungee cord to get some naturalistic, realistic motion that might happen with these two characters climbing such a big distance. I let the camera run for a real long time, hoping that when I brought it into my compositing program, that I could find a nice little section that I could 2D animate it. So that's what made it into the shot. And when I presented it, I still didn't tell anybody at ILM how I was doing the shot. Well, it was finaled on take one. And it made me really happy. And then I got to tell them how I did it. And it was just a nice blend of extremely high-tech stuff going on in this scene and the lowest tech you could possibly imagine, using stuff that I found around my house and the phone that was in my pocket at the time. All right, let's now take a look at a shot from Star Trek Into Darkness. This is a shot which shows you Starship Enterprise in an environment that you've never seen it before, hiding underwater on an alien planet. And this is the big reveal to the aliens of that planet who had never seen a starship before. Kind of a big shot. I think it's a very good demonstration of staging things for camera and trying your best with what you have to sell scale. We want the Enterprise to feel very, very big. I was the compositor on this shot. Lee Urin did the water for this shot, and Tom just lit the Enterprise. At the time, a very, very complicated water simulation, one of the craziest ones we've ever done, using physics particle simulation tools that are mimicking what would happen if a piece of matter gets blown by the wind or collides with thousands of its similar pieces of geometry. An object breaks through it that needs to have authentic collisions. We have tools to help us calculate all of those things that would happen in real life. You always start with what would be physically accurate. What would really happen if you were to stage this incredible scene of a gigantic spaceship emerging from the water? And frequently the answer is it would be really boring, or you wouldn't get the scale cues, or it would look really small for some reason or another. Sometimes the real thing is not what you need. You have to tell a story, and real life and real life physics are not on your side. The artifice of movies is staging things for camera. And that's what Lee had to do for this water simulation, which has many, many different elements and required a ton of horsepower to get accomplished. This first version is one of the earliest versions of the scene that the animators were working with. These actors were filmed against a blue screen. I did a quick extraction of the blue screen, and the animators did a slow reveal of the Enterprise. Basic framing, the feeling of the shot is going to change once the water's added, but this gives us a blueprint, a starting point. This is a work in progress where we're trying to define the horizon line, the detail of the ocean, the detail of the clouds. How is this all going to work together? Pretty intimidating that we're going to have to put a spaceship back there that's covered in water. Just like anything in real life, you have to start small, you have to start controlled. The domain of the ocean is actually pretty small, because if that domain gets super big, the calculations that the computer has to do to resolve the physics, it just gets astronomical. So you try to make things as small as possible at first and then expand out if you have to. These are witness camera fixed perspectives to try to see, okay, does this feel like water sheeting off of it? Does it feel big? Is it moving in the ways that we want it to in terms of gross movement? There were certain aspects of the shot that we wanted to make sure that we saw. So we have to make sure that the back of the engine, the nacelle, was revealed at just the right point. So we have to make sure the water is cleared by that point. If we were doing this for real, the water would have sheeted off of the nacelle pretty quickly, but we need to keep the water going. So we're doing all these tricks to make sure that the water continues to flow. It's hard in real life, and it's hard in simulations. You give it your best shot as to what would really happen with real world physics. The particles will do their thing, but that's not right for the movie. If I want this gush of water to come this way instead of this way, I have to trick the simulation. I have to trick physics. And we have all these wonderful tools to help guide physics to work in our favor. There's all these tiny little stories happening all over the place with how the water sheets and the water reacts to the Enterprise. Like where the rocket is blasting out all this energy, seeing the water interact with that and just get flung right out. Steam and vapor and stuff like that. Water droplets, digital wind machines to make sure that the vapor goes right in the actor's face or just goes right behind the camera. It's that kind of attention to detail that makes it feel big. It just reminds me of behind the scenes photos you see of some of your favorite movies and how jarring it is sometimes to see 50 crew members just inches away from an actor's face. Even something like this, where it's just a person behind a desk. There's so many things that have to happen in order to get the desired lighting effect. There's bounce cards everywhere. There's lights. There's a crew just a couple feet away. There's microphones. I mean, there's a lot of things that are being done to cheat reality in order to get the artistic effect across that we're trying to do. And the exact same thing happens in visual effects. Movies, it's all about cheating. All right, let's take a look at a really cool scene from Transformers. It's one of the iconic shots from the Scorponok Desert sequence. One of the really exciting things about working on a Michael Bay movie is his focus on photography. He wants to film things, and he wants to film things blowing up. So the special effects department that is in charge of sparks and explosions and smoke and all of these types of things worked really hard on these movies. It gives the plates, the photography that we get, that we then have to make robots work within that scene, an energy that is very difficult to recreate if you were building everything from scratch. You've already got such a rich tapestry of photography to start with, and then you get to make the cool robots inside it. In every shot, there's an element of physical effects. There's a mortar going off, there's dust, there's smoke. Something is actually happening in the shot for the camera operator to frame and for the actors to react to. And that makes a huge difference when we're adding synthetic characters. This shot I did not work on. I'm only showing it because I'm very jealous of the fact that everybody here did such a great job. This is the photography. These actors are running toward camera and a gigantic sand explosion happening behind them. And the whole brief was Scorponok bursts out from underneath the sand, can barely misses them, and goes back into the sand. Here's what the animators, under the supervision of Scott Benza, came up with. This is the idea for the shot design. What you're obviously not seeing is any of the foreground holdouts. Scorponok is supposed to be behind the actors, but this gives us an idea of how it's all gonna work. Even though there's a lot of physical effects, sand and explosions going on, we wanted to make sure that it felt like Scorponok was just underneath the sand and is oozing sand from all of its mechanics. So Nigel Sumner worked on the particle effects for this. And it's very supporting stuff, but just enough to make it feel like sand is coming out of all of those moving gears of the robot. So this is what it looks like with just the CG sand and Scorponok rendered, and with some stock sand elements that were shot specifically for this movie against a blue screen that Mike Conti, the compositor, started to add in because there was no physical effects of Scorponok diving back into the sand. So we needed to indicate that in some way with these sand bursts. So we've got a combination of computer graphics and then real physical effects added into the shot. This is just what the render looks like of the Scorponok against the plate. And this shows you how much work the compositor Mike Conti had to do. The lighting beautifully done by John Sigurdsson. Beth D'Amato was the roto paint supervisor of this production. Rotoscoping is the painstaking frame by frame tracing of live action elements because we wanted to reliably be able to put computer graphics elements behind them. That can get really, really complicated really, really fast. These actors, every single frame of them had to be traced. Amazing work. This is a nearly 20-year-old shot, and tools, at least in computer graphics, have advanced greatly. Why does this still hold up? Why does this look really good still? If you have people with vision who stick to a plan and enough time and resources are given to execute that plan, and of course the level of taste and talent of all the people involved, you can create something that's timeless. Even if you can see the seams. The original Jurassic Park holds up beautifully because of all the amazing fundamentals of filmmaking, of shot design, of drawing your eye, having dynamic shots, foreground, midground, background, perfectly aligning with the style of the director, all by design with a very methodical approach.
Nice job!
I'm getting pretty good at this.
Now it's time to take a look at a scene from Star Wars: The Force Awakens. So this shot means a lot to me. When I was 10 years old, I saw Return of the Jedi. I was a big Star Wars fan. I remember getting my hands on the making of Return of the Jedi magazine. And I will never forget the photo of Paul Houston at the San Rafael campus of Industrial Light and Magic working on the AT-ST. And he's standing right next to it. And I'm like, wait a second, people make this? This is amazing. What is he doing? What is actually he setting up? There's miniature trees. There's a miniature AT-ST. How does this work? And that's led me down the road of what I ended up wanting to do for a living. And what's really fun about this shot is that I got to work on a Star Wars shot with Paul Houston. Paul Houston created the environment for this particular shot. The Millennium Falcon was lit by Dan Lobel. Paul Cavanaugh is the animation supervisor, and I was the compositor. So I'm gonna break down some of the elements of this shot. This is what the animation team puts together. That gets handed over to the lighting team It's very similar to if we're all playing with our action figures, as we all did when we were young, and moving spaceships around a space. That's what the animators are doing. They're running it through the space. They're less concerned about the lighting and texturing of the environment and of the ships. So then the lighting team, it takes this animation and has to determine, all right, what's the best sunspot to show off the Falcon in this shot? We need to sell the scale of this shot. We need to make it feel authentic. We need to make it feel spontaneous, as if a camera crew was out waiting in the desert and waiting for their cue, and they hear on the walkie-talkie, here come the spaceships. All right, is everybody ready? Just getting the best absolute image possible within those constraints. Our lighter would hang on a frame like this and try to make it work for this frame. Then they would run through the entire animation. Well, at what point does it break? Well, it looks really good on this frame, but it doesn't look really good on this frame. So maybe we should adjust. Just as a cinematographer would do on a real set. It's the exact same analog, but except we're using digital tools rather than physically moving lights. As a compositor, this is a representation of what I'm handed. It is the environment and the spaceships that are rendered. What you're not seeing are all of sand and dust swirls, the glints, the glares. This is on a desert planet, and the sun is really, really hot, and we need to be able to see things that are lit by the sun and also in the shadows. That's a very difficult thing to get across when you're dealing with all CG scenes. And you're also not seeing the depth of field effects that would happen when you're shooting with such a long lens. 1500 millimeter lens. We don't usually see that in Star Wars movies, which means that things that are very close to camera would be very much out of focus. The camera is actually recording lots of real estate. There's many, many layers of depth. How are we gonna make that feel real when it's entirely computer graphics? Other things like camera shake and heat ripple and heat distortion from the mirage effect that you get when you're in a very hot environment. This is an illustration of some of the layers of depth and dust that gets kicked up and sand that gets kicked up. We were trying to simulate the idea that when the Falcon goes really low, like some energy coming off of the Falcon is displacing a lot of sand. And all of that stuff helps you understand how big these things are, what's close and what's far away. These are all the things I love to do. And of course it has blasters in it and TIE fighters. So when I embarked on this shot, I was like, let's make it as cool as possible. Digital visual effects is just like any other step in the filmmaking process. There's really not a lot of fundamental difference between, say, what the costume designer does, what the editors do, what the set designers do. We're all trying to work together to solve problems and tell the story using light and images the best we can within the time that we have. It takes a lot of coordination to get all of this stuff done. And sometimes hundreds and hundreds of digital artists working behind the scenes. There's a perception out there that digital effects are a black box, that it just gets shipped off and the directors are just handed this work. Couldn't be further from the truth. We work directly with filmmakers to achieve their vision.